Pompeii was a city of vibrant color, of routines, plans, and everyday life, until everything was erased in a matter of hours. A living city, full of voices, movement, and certainty, suddenly turned into silence. For 2,000 years, the figures frozen in their final moments have asked us a silent question. Why did they stay? Because what happened here was not instant. It was not a single moment. It was a countdown. What began as a cloud in the sky turned into something impossible to escape. Ash falling, stones crashing down, the air itself disappearing. And even then, many did not run, not because they could not, but because they did not understand or did not want to believe. In this investigation, we reconstruct the final 32 hours of Pompeii from the first warning to the final breath. We are not just looking at ruins, we are looking at the exact moment life was interrupted by fire. But there is a deeper question buried beneath the ash. What were the warning signs that everyone chose to ignore? The disaster did not begin in a single moment. It began years earlier. Before the destruction, Pompeii was not a symbol of death. It was life. Streets filled with movement, markets echoing with voices, homes open to the rhythm of everyday routine. A city that felt stable, almost untouchable. In the year 62 Anno Domini, a massive earthquake struck the region, cracking walls, toppling structures, and leaving visible scars across the city. But the people of Pompeii did what humans have always done. They rebuilt. They repaired their homes, restored their frescoes, and moved forward, convinced the worst had already passed. And slowly, danger became normal. Small tremors continued, subtle, frequent, easy to ignore. Wells began to dry. The ground shifted beneath their feet. But life did not stop. Business continued. Conversations continued. The city adapted because, to the Romans, Vesuvius was not a volcano. It was a quiet green mountain, a backdrop of vineyards and villas. It had been silent for centuries. Whatever it once was had been forgotten. This created something far more dangerous than the eruption itself: complacency. Even as pressure built deep beneath the earth, even as the system moved toward collapse, the people of Pompeii remained focused on the ordinary. Elections, trade, daily concerns, the warning signs were there. But when danger becomes familiar, it stops feeling like danger. And without realizing it, they were already living inside the final countdown. The first sign was not fire. It was a cloud. At around midday, the sky above Mount Vesuvius was torn open. A massive column began to rise, dense, towering, and unlike anything the people of Pompeii had ever seen. It stretched higher and higher into the sky, forming a shape that would later be described by Pliny the Younger as resembling an umbrella pine, its trunk rising upward before spreading into dark branching layers. At first, there was hesitation, curiosity. People stopped to look. This was not unfamiliar. The ground had trembled before, strange signs had come and gone. And so for a moment, this too seemed like something that would pass, but it did not. The light began to fade, not gradually like a sunset, but suddenly, the sun was swallowed behind ash and debris, turning day into something unrecognizable. A heavy gray darkness spread across the sky. Then came the stones, small at first, light, almost harmless. But within minutes, pumice began to fall in increasing volume, sharp porous fragments raining down on rooftops, streets, and bodies. The sound grew into a constant deafening impact, a storm of stone. Still, many did not run. Some moved indoors, believing it was safer inside. Others stayed, watching, waiting, unsure of what they were witnessing. Doors were closed, families gathered. The outside world disappeared beneath layers of falling debris. What began as a strange spectacle was becoming something else, and with every passing minute, escape was becoming harder. By the evening, what had seemed strange had become deadly. The pumice was no longer falling lightly. It was relentless, layer upon layer, accumulating at a rate that turned minutes into weight and weight into collapse. Roofs were never designed to withstand this kind of pressure. Across the city, structures began to fail. Timbers cracked, walls gave way, ceilings collapsed without warning. Inside those homes were the people who believed they were safe. So why did they not leave? The answer was not ignorance alone. It was human nature for many. Their home was everything. Their possessions, their savings, their identity. Leaving meant abandoning it all. And outside there was only chaos. Streets were no longer familiar paths but shifting terrain covered in stone. The sky was black. Visibility was almost gone. Venturing out meant stepping into the unknown. Inside there was at least the illusion of control. Families gathered in the darkest corners of their homes. Some moved into cellars. Others blocked doors trying to keep the ash out. They held on to what they could: valuables, loved ones, the last fragments of normal life. But the very thing that made them stay sealed their fate, because the danger was no longer just above them. It was all around them, and as the eruption intensified, something else was changing, something far more lethal than falling stone. The mountain was shifting, and what came next would give no time to choose. As the second day approached, there was no sunrise, only a deeper darkness inside the mountain. The pressure had reached its limit. The massive column of ash that had been rising into the sky could no longer sustain itself. It collapsed. What followed was not an explosion, but a release. A series of pyroclastic surges, fast-moving avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and debris began racing down the slopes of Vesuvius at incredible speed. Invisible at first, silent from a distance, unstoppable, the first waves struck the surrounding areas, wiping out nearby settlements almost instantly. Entire regions disappeared without resistance. There was no time to react, no time to understand Pompeii was next. By the time the surge reached the city, there was no longer any escape. What moved toward them was not smoke, not fire, but a wall of heat and toxic air. The temperature surged to extreme levels. The air itself became lethal in a single moment. Breathing stopped. There were no final decisions, no last attempts to flee. The body reacted instantly, muscles contracting under intense thermal shock, freezing people in place. This was not a slow burial. It was instant annihilation. The positions we see today, the figures curled, shielding their faces, reaching for others, are not poses of escape. They are the final imprint of a moment where survival was no longer possible. Everything human was replaced by ash, and in that final surge, Pompeii ceased to exist. By the afternoon of the second day, the violence was over. The mountain fell silent. Where a city once stood, alive with movement, voices, and routine, there was now only a vast, gray emptiness. Pompeii had not just been destroyed, it had been erased. Buried so completely that over time, even its location faded from memory. Roads disappeared, names were forgotten. What remained was not a ruin, but an absence. For centuries, Pompeii existed only as a whisper beneath the soil, until it was found again. When excavation began, what emerged was not just stone, but moments. Lives interrupted mid-action. A mother holding her child, a man covering his face, a dog still chained, frozen in its final struggle, not symbols. People preserved not in history books, but in their last second of existence. Pompeii became more than a tragedy. It became a mirror because what we see in those figures is not just the past, it is something uncomfortably familiar. The hesitation, the doubt, the belief that there is still time, the assumption that disaster will not come today. The Romans did not think they were living their final hours. And yet they were. We like to believe we would act differently, that we would recognize the signs, that we would leave in time. But Pompeii asks a different question. When the warnings are subtle, when danger feels distant, when life seems normal, would we really know when to leave? The stones are cold now, the ash has settled, but the message remains clear, silent, unanswered. The final hours of Pompeii reveal something deeper than destruction. They show how thin the line is between normal life and total collapse. A single day, a few decisions, a moment of hesitation, that is all it took. And maybe that is why this story still stays with us. Not because of the volcano, but because of how human it is. If you found this journey meaningful, if it made you think, question, or see history differently, then this is exactly what this channel is about. Subscribe to follow more stories like this. Stories where the past is not distant, but a reflection of what we still are. And if Pompeii was the end of a single city, there is another moment in history where the collapse did not stop there. It spread across countries, across societies, across millions of lives. The Black Death, while Pompeii was a sudden catastrophe, the plague was a slow, unstoppable transformation of an entire world. The next video is on your screen. Now continue the journey, because understanding how things fall apart is the only way to understand what might come next.